And I just saw this film called External Spring. Man, I was fascinated about it, and I was surprised about it. But the director, Jason Loftus, he's here to talk to us about that film, Eternal Spring. How you doing, Jason?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me, Al.
Oh man, glad to hear from you. Now, this happens in China, particularly in this one city called Changchun, China, where citizens develop a new religion or a thesis of a religion or a new ideal of religion, but the state, the communist state, does not allow that.
hmm
Well, tell us more about it.
Yeah, so is centered around a community, a spiritual community called Falun Gong, and this is so in China traditionally there were a
Now,
lot of
Falun
these
Gong
sort.
is the name of the religion, right?
That's right. You got it. Yep, you've got it. And so traditionally in China, there were these type of practices. We see people practicing these things in the parks, looks like Tai Chi or yoga, slow moving exercises. So in China, historically, these were typically associated with some kind of spiritual practice. So the exercises were, for more than just health, also some kind of spiritual refinement, meditative type things, right? But when the communists took over in 1949, they were, officially atheists. They were at odds with religion. They kind of destroyed a lot of this. So they would destroy temples, force the monks to marry. And even today, where there's some tolerance of religion in China, they're all sort of patriotic religions, which means they have to put the Communist Party above whatever their, God or belief system is, right? So this is how religion has operated in China. What happened, though, is in the aftermath of one of the major political campaigns in China in the mid 1970s, the Cultural Revolution had just ended. The country was in a shambles. Medical system was overtaxed as well. Everything was just a mess. It tolerated and even encouraged a kind of resurgence of these meditative practices. But at that time, they were called qigong, and qigong is essentially just two Chinese words that both mean energy. So it's like an energy practice. And so what it was is they were practicing things that looked like these practices that had been done historically, but they weren't talking about the religious parts, the kind of like, the parts that maybe made the state more nervous. So in the midst of this rise of Qigong, Falun Gong became the most popular of these Qigong practices. It was introduced in 1992. And by 1999, there were estimates that there were tens of millions, potentially even 100 million people, hard to determine for sure, but many, many people were practicing this. Now, the thing with Falun Gong is that it was not an organized religion in the sense that it had temples or membership or collected donations or these types of things, but it did have this spiritual philosophical component to it that felt like traditional Chinese spiritual practices. And
Yeah, and
so
part
as
of
it got,
part of it is that they wanted to help develop their character, but also try to have a better physical life with part
yes.
of that philosophy, which I really enjoyed, listening about this religion. But why was the government so against this idea, this religion? Why was the government?
Yeah, so you're right. It's a practice of both mind and body, and that's where the exercises come from. And the idea in it is that as you improve your character, you do these exercises, your health will improve together. It's this idea of a connection of mind and body going together. So they think the thing is the popularity of it. So we're talking about numbers of people that are more than Communist Party membership in just 7 years. And the party also has this desire to have a control. They've always tried to control all of the religion or have no religion in China. And so this like this widespread popularity that seems to kind of happen overnight, I think unnerved some of these rulers and they wanted to stamp it out. And they also, I don't think, realized how much people really enjoyed it and how difficult, because typically, Chinese people, they're repressed. The government can be very heavy handed. People don't try to oppose that or go against the government because they know how harsh they can be. So I think the authorities felt they could stamp this out pretty quickly. But there was this kind of like a lot of people had been disconnected from faith and religion, and they really connected deeply with Falun Gong. And so this whole effort to stamp it out became this sort of struggle. The people wanted to continue to practice, the government wanted to get rid of it. And so there was this a campaign to arrest and imprison people. There was a lot of reports of torture and death, even in these labor camps that were happening, where people just didn't want to give up their practice. And at the same time, there was a real massive propaganda campaign from the government. The government controls all of the media channels in China, so over television, radio, newspapers. Everyone is saying all of a sudden that this practice is evil and dangerous and bad, and we need to get rid of it. And so this would achieve the purpose of sort of justifying the torture and the abuse that people were being subjected to, but also in turning the public against Falun Gong to make it easier for them, turn in your neighbor. These guys are doing something bad and dangerous. And so it's turning the population against the practice. And that's where the story really begins here for this film, which is that these people were trying to do what they could to say, no, what the government's saying about us isn't right. They would make like little flyers or leaflets and hand those out. They would make these kind of primitive DVDs. At the time, they were essentially CD-ROMs that you could play, and, like the homemade video would counter the government's propaganda about them. But they felt that they couldn't keep up because, the government controlled all television, media, newspapers, everything. And they were just, handing things out and at risk of being turned in at any time. So there's a group of them that said, we got to think bigger. They hatched a plan to climb the television poles in prime time and bring their little, video players and hack into the state-run television signal and play their own messaging. And so this is this heist story, this like, this caper of trying to take over the airwaves, and this band of underdogs, eclectic group of people you would not expect to be doing something like this. And they hatch this plan, and there's difference of opinions within the community. Hey, this is illegal. We might get, real big repercussions about it. So there's different opinions about it, but ultimately there's a group of them that feel we need to do this and go ahead. And so in the aftermath of this thing, which is really an unprecedented, like it never happened before, this breach of the Communist Party's control over the media, they arrest thousands of people trying to find out what happened. And so our entrance point to this story is an artist. He's drawn Justice League of America comics. He's drawn Star Wars comics. And he's from this city where this TV hijacking took place. And he was briefly tortured in the aftermath. He had to flee his hometown and leave it all behind. And he's been separated because of this event, even though he didn't personally hijack the television. He was just part of the Falun Gong community, and they were arresting everybody trying to find out who was involved. So we meet this artist because we're making a Kung Fu video game, and he's working with us. And we learn his story, and he seems to really want to go explore this event and understand what happened and why these people did what they did. And, and he's not sure if it was a great idea himself because of how severely he suffered. And he wants to explore this through his art. So he's meeting other survivors. We meet the one guy who survived, the actual TV hijacker who survived and got out of China, and he's living in Korea. We meet him, and Daxiong's interviewing him and drawing his story, and we're bringing this to life in animation. So there's an animated kind of heist story of this takeover of the airwaves, and then there's this kind of like human component of an artist trying to understand an event that impacted him and showing us through his creation of his art how he gains a new understanding about a traumatic event, and hopefully gain some healing through that process as well.
Yeah, of course. And the hijacking of the TV station took place March 5th, 2002.
Right.
And just like you said, the artist, he didn't know really too much about it. He was not involved. But when it happened, well, I thought it was a very good, masterful plan. And they did do it. And people saw it and said, wait a minute, you know what? They are kind of correct about, and what the government said, well, I don't know. The government might be wrong because these people already knew about the religious idea or the religious practices, and they wanted the people to succeed. But why they're surprised that the government was against them? Because it's the communist government, it's China. Why were they surprised?
Yeah, I think they were surprised. I think they were surprised by two things. One is the claims that the government was making. So the propaganda kept getting more and more extreme. These people were like, at first they were tolerated, they were even encouraged. There's state media reports showing, hey, this is good for your health. Falun Gong is a traditional Chinese thing. And all of a sudden it's like, wow, this thing's really popular and people have their own ideas and we don't control them. And then the switch flips overnight and now these people are evil and dangerous and they might murder you. You have to stay away from them. And at a certain level, people probably don't believe it at first. They're like, hold on, I saw these people. They're just trying to meditate. But when it's all you hear all of the time, and then they'll throw in their images of, we did another project, another production where we interviewed people who worked inside the media and in China. And we were told, there would be someone who was psychologically unstable, murdered someone. The family members were were really concerned. They're saying, look, I forgot to give him his medication. It's our fault. Please don't like execute him. And they would say, look, we will lighten his sentence if you say that he did it because he practices Falun Gong. And then this guy ends up on TV saying, look, Falun Gong led me to murder people. And this is kind of how the news is crafted inside of China. So you hear enough of this stuff, you start to think, maybe there's something I didn't notice about these people. Maybe they are evil and dangerous. It creates this kind of hate. It creates suspicion, this kind of thing, right? So I think people
Yeah.
were shocked by the claims. And then they were shocked when that balloon burst and these people made this message of like, hey, no, we're peaceful. We're trying to be truthful, compassionate, and tolerant. This is what we're about. A lot of people were like, wow, now they really can't look at the state propaganda the same way. They kind of, a part of them realizes they've been lied to. And that's shocking. My wife had this experience. My wife is from China. When she came outside of China, she didn't know about the Tiananmen Square massacre in 1989. She didn't even know there was tanks rolling over students. Never seen those images, never heard about it, right? And she comes out and she learns these things, and it's a shock to your system. Like, how is it possible that I've been lied to about these things my whole life? But this is what happens under totalitarian regimes, and with a communist regime in particular. This is what happens. So it's shocking to the system for Chinese people to learn about these events that they have been lied to about or not even told.
Well, also here in the United States, though, we still suffer from that too. First of all, with the Native Americans, been lied to for years, and they've been having many treaties back in the past canceled, and the way they living now. And also myself as an African American, now they're trying to, like here in Florida with the governor, they're trying to ban books about African Americans and other immigrants, and also the history of African Americans. They don't even want to teach that in our schools, especially down here in Florida and a few other states too. So this is going on with no matter what type of government it is. That's going on with many governments. But getting back to this movie, you had some very interesting characters. For example, Mr. White, Liang, his story, but not only his story, Big Truck, his story also in this movie, and also there's other people, the auntie in this story. Man, I really felt for these people. I really did, because they didn't do anything wrong.
Yeah, they suffered greatly, and their stories really impacted me too. And as a filmmaker, my goal was simply to, I had the opportunity to spend a lot of time with the material, to speak with a lot of witnesses who knew these people. You start to feel like you know them. And then your goal as a filmmaker is just to try, within the confines of this, like this frame that you have, right? That you could, this screen that you can share. And within, a 90-minute story, is to be able to allow people to kind of experience what I've experienced, to get to know these people, to feel that spirit of hope that they had, the bravery and the courage and the suffering that they endured as a result of that. There's something really universal. And, I think what you touched on too, it's like people will see, comparisons between this and other situations we have. It deals with this misinformation. It deals with division and hate and censorship. And I think it speaks to how important it is that we have different points of view, because any situation where there's control from one authority who gets to determine what we're allowed to see and what we're not allowed to see, and there's no contradictory viewpoints, if that kind of power exists and it's in the hands of people who really have all like nefarious motives, it can be extraordinarily damaging to people. Like it can cause massive abuses. And we see that, like some people are making comparisons to what they see happening in, in the Ukraine, where there's this narrative, pushed on all the Russian people that these people are, we have to, get rid of the Nazis or whatever they say they're doing there. It's all these dangers. And it's only when people buy in on a wide scale to a narrative that they can justify the actions that they're doing. And you see that with any genocide that's taken place in some country or any location. First of all, you have to dehumanize these people. You have to make them worthy of any kind of punishment. You have to make people scared of them, right? And so this whole idea of division and hate, I think, it needs to be replaced with a message of love and understanding, where people can understand. It's like people can have different opinions. People can have different beliefs from me. But as long as people are, I have to recognize first that they come to that as a human being. They have a shared human experience. And I think building more bridges of empathy and understanding, like, can help to get rid of that. It's not just about the, just being misunderstood. the basis for the torture and the suffering and everything that they're enduring is based on these lies and hate. And so if we can create more understanding between people and more empathy, I think it has a real consequence in like reducing these human rights abuses that we see at the same time.
Yeah, you're exactly right about that. Let's talk about the main character in the film, Daxiong,
Daxiong,
the
yeah.
artist, the one who lives in
Yes.
Korea,
He's
who
he's
escaped.
in Toronto now. He visited to
That's right,
Korea with us.
Toronto,
Yep.
right.
Yep.
And tell us a little bit more about him, because I found him to be a very interesting person. And
Mm,
also, what I also understood about him too, that his family supported his artistic endeavors or his talent, and they wanted
yeah.
him to go on with that. But in the end, his father really kind of turned against him, because he came home, his father threw away all his religious books about that practice that he was practicing, and other things like that. So he had to escape. He's in Toronto. So tell us a little bit more about him.
Yeah. No, I'll talk about that relationship that you're talking about, because I think this is what it's a very sad thing, but it's what the intimidation, the torture, the threats, the misinformation that the party is responsible for. It's an example of what it does to families. So if you look at Daxiong, his father saw his talent as an artist very young. So Daxiong was inspired not by the superhero comics he read from the US. In his day, it was these Chinese comics which talked about real life historical figures who were great heroes. And I think that inspired him to look for these kind of everyday heroes, people who were heroic in everyday actions and in real life situations, right? Not necessarily because they had superpowers and flew around with capes and such. So this was an interesting insight for me in terms of where his inspiration came from. But his father saw his talent and nurtured it, and bought him books on comic books and drawing books and these kinds of things. And then you see that flip where he's destroying his son's books, and that's not because all of a sudden he flipped and he hated his son or didn't want to nurture his interests and such. It's a result of the fear and intimidation that the state was thrusting upon them, right? So he was warning his son. He's like, whatever you do, don't go out, like don't challenge the government. You can never face them. And it's because his father, this is something we don't get into in great detail in the film, but his father had been subject to persecution in China. So one of the political campaigns during the Cultural Revolution, they took aim at anybody who was considered elite in society. So he had been an academic and he was well educated, and so that meant that he was repressing people, and we needed to get rid of him. And so he was sent to the countryside. He had his name destroyed in China, and a lot of people went through this. And so he had experienced the political persecution, and his lesson that he took from that, he had a lot of I think ambitions that were never achieved. He had this sorrow from his experiences, as Daxiong describes it to us. And he just channeled that into wanting to protect his children from the same experience. And so it didn't come from a hate or resentment of Falun Gong or Daxiong's religious beliefs,
Right.
and it didn't come from a change in attitude towards his son either. It was a protection mechanism. He was afraid that his son would be harmed the way that he had been harmed. And so what he does is he burns his son's books, his spiritual books, the things that mean the most to him, where he gains his strength and his inspiration. He burns them. And so you can just see how this destroyed family relationships. Again, that hurt Daxiong deeply, obviously, but you understand where it comes from. It's this pressure from the authorities. Yeah. So anyway, Daxiong is a very interesting character. He's such a unique talent, artistically. He really has this ability to bring things to life, but also give you this kind of sense and feeling. It's not just about the details of the buildings in his city, right? It's got a soul to it. It's got a feeling to it. He really
Right.
conveys that through his art.
Yeah, and that's one thing I like about that song, and what he talked about. Again, you said he didn't talk about the buildings and things like that. It was the people that he
Yeah.
talked about, that he focused on. And I myself, I think about, I lived in a few cities. I can't really talk about the people. That's, friends I know, things like that.
Mhm.
But on the whole, it has to be the buildings and landmarks and things like that. I talk, and that's one thing I like about that song. And but do he feel guilty that he left?
I think inevitably, this is from my perspective, inevitably people who suffer trauma and survive and the people around them do not. you know, friends who die, other people who were maybe sticking their necks out a little bit more on behalf of the same community that they belong to, and they get killed, right? And then you carry something with you. You have this feeling of, why did I survive and others did not? And I could see that in Daxiong. So one of the early things, you know, when we started collaborating with him, is we just let him draw whatever he was feeling. And so there's this scene later on in the film where he's sort of running from this black and white, these brush strokes. That's just his, he's just getting it out on screen. He's going through his, or like he was putting it on paper, and we were draping it onto 3D shapes to kind of bring it to life. But this is right from his pen. And he was just getting these feelings, and there was a lot of darkness and trauma and all of this stuff layered into it. And he was just, you know, putting it out there. And I feel like a lot of people who go through this, they carry these things with them. And so what was powerful for me is to see how the artistic process, you know, so Daxiong drawing and giving life to these stories of these people who did not survive, helped heal him. I could see it in him that he felt, you know, yes, they died, I survived, but I was able to use my talent to help tell their story. So a piece of them is still alive and continuing on. And I see him feeling this way. And I see the reaction that he gets when he shares his story, when the film is, you know, when he's in the audience and he sees people reacting to the film, and the catharsis that that brings to him, you know, the healing that that brings to him because he's able to share this story. I think there is guilt inevitably, right? And I think art has a power to help to heal. And sharing stories, you know, of people who were courageous. Now he's facing challenges himself. You know, his family members and everyone who's worked with him in China are under pressure from the authorities, especially after the film was chosen as Canada's Oscar entry for the International Feature Award, right at the Oscars. The next day, Daxiong's name appeared on a list of banned authors in China. They're removing books from, you know, educational institutions and libraries and such as a result of this. And he, you know, and his family members and everyone who's worked with him is being harassed. So he's separated and isolated from all these people for their own safety, right? And so he's been isolated, he's been denounced, he's faced all of this stuff, but now he's facing these difficulties, but he still feels like this is something important. I need to persist. I need to tell this story. He feels it's his way to contribute to these other people who, you know, endured so much and aren't able to continue to carry on their story.
Wow, that's something. Now, one more question. When people see this film, how do you want them to react, or how do you want them to feel?
I just want to share the story, you know, and see how people react. It's something that impacted me deeply. Like, obviously, you know, there's a real human rights situation. So it's great that people learn about what's going on there because they can talk with their elected representatives about the persecution of Falun Gong, about religious freedom in China, about censorship. People can be aware of these things. I hope a lot of Chinese people see it. We're making efforts to have more Chinese people see it so that they can understand this is a message for China, for Chinese people, right? This is an important thing. So there's all of that stuff about what's going on in the real world, but there's also something that's really just hard to pin down. There's just something very touching about the courage, you know, and it's a sad story, but I hope that people also still take this spirit of hope because I really sensed it, you know, from the stories of these people and from the messages that I got from the survivors. Despite all they had suffered, there's still this real sense of hope. And I think that's powerful because, you know, we seldom face the same kind of challenges on the scale that they have faced, but we all face challenges and we all face like situations where it's difficult to speak up and say something that we think is right when we notice that something is wrong or there's an injustice. We all face that kind of challenge and difficulty. And just the courage that's on display here and, you know, the willingness to sacrifice and shine up, you know, and do what's right, I think is something that all of us can kind of connect with and take something away from, right? So that's, I think, just on a basic level, I just want people to feel that same experience that I've had because I found it very inspiring and rewarding.
Yeah, I connected with this film very much so, and man, my heart went out to the people there, and again, like I said, I connected to it because of what's going on here in Florida and also here in the United States. Well, thank you, Jason, for taking time with me, Al McGee here at yeticket.com. External Spring is going to hit the theaters soon, and I'm going to put the word out. Of course, I am. And you did a very good job with this, and I love the way you put it together with the animation and with real people too. I thought that was very brilliant. I love those type of films myself. I really do. You did a great job with that. So thank you, Jason, for spending time with me.
My pleasure, Al. Really appreciate it. And yeah, the film is in 77 cinemas across the US as of this weekend right now. So if people are interested, eternalspringfilm.com is where they can get their listings. And I really appreciate your giving me the time to share about the film with your audience.
Thank you very much.
This is your entertainment ticket, latest and greatest.